Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach, and in today's mini episode, we're going to wrap up our conversation about the different types of chokes in jiu-jitsu, so let's go. Now, if you've listened to the prior episodes, then you know that at BJJ Mental Models, we classify chokes down into these categories. You've got blood chokes, which is where you reduce blood flow to the brain by compressing the carotid arteries. We've got air chokes, which is where you compress the windpipe or cover the mouth. We've got compression chokes, which is where you crush the body to the point where the lungs can't expand. And we've got cranks, which is where you attempt to damage the neck by taking it outside of its natural range of motion. A crank, again, if you didn't listen to that mini episode we did about cranks, is not technically a choke, but I like to discuss cranks alongside chokes because cranks often occur as a byproduct of chokes, and in many rule sets, if it looks like a choke, it's going to be called as a choke, even if it's a crank. Now, with those in mind, it's important to bring up that many chokes don't fall cleanly into one of these categories, and in fact, it can be a bit of a thought trap to try to be seeking a perfectly clean choke that falls into a single type of choking category. As an example, with blood chokes, many times if there's some pressure on the windpipe or if there's a bit of a crank, people will tell you that the choke is not quote-unquote clean. The expectation being that it needs to be 100% a blood choke or it's somehow less legitimate. I would push back on that. I would say first and foremost, no choke, no matter how quote-unquote clean, will be 100% a blood choke. And second, beyond that, if you can do a choke safely with control, if you can get the tap against good opponents with that choke, and if it's legal under the rule set, I don't see any reason to be dogmatic about whether the choke is the correct type or not. So the reality is, with most types of chokes, you will often find that they are a hybrid. It's just a matter of degree. How much are they a hybrid? How much do they blend across these different categories of chokes versus how cleanly do they fall into a single category? I don't know if there's really a science for doing this. It could be the case that if you attack the neck straight on, you're more likely to have a choke that falls into one type of category. For example, the rear naked choke, you're pretty symmetrical to your opponent, and the rear naked is probably one of the chokes that is easiest to get as a blood choke primarily. You don't see a lot of rear naked chokes where people will complain that it was a crank or that it was an air choke. But when you start attacking from asymmetrical angles, it seems to me that that's where you're going to likely see chokes that kind of become hybrids of the two. Some examples that we might want to consider: think of the high elbow guillotine, aka the Marcellotine. That's a choke that is asymmetrical. You're kind of putting a weird twist on your opponent's body. You're not lined up directly with them. The end result is you're going to get a choke that is likely going to be primarily a blood choke, but maybe not. There can be elements of an air choke there. Because you're attacking the neck sideways, there can also be elements of a crank there. And a lot of these chokes where you kind of twist the person may result in hybrid choking mechanics, where it's not just one thing that's going to force the person to tap, but there could be multiple mechanics at play. Another example that can be kind of nasty is the Peruvian necktie. Again, it's a twisting choke, and also because you're sitting on the person, it creates a very awkward angle, and it's hard for you to know exactly what you're doing to a person when you have them in a Peruvian. It's pretty unlikely, if you go for a submission like that it will be 100% a blood choke. You often get a hybrid. So a hybrid choke is not necessarily a bad thing. And again, many types of submissions will blend these mechanics. So I encourage people to avoid feeling the need to chase a perfectly quote-unquote clean choke. Now that said, if your mechanics are just straight up wrong or bad, you want to make sure you correct those. So as an example, if a choke is primarily a blood choke, like a rear naked, but everyone is telling you that it's cranking them for some reason, that is an indication that probably you could tighten it up a bit but the presence of other choking mechanics doesn't necessarily mean you're doing something wrong. One other thing to ask is, are hybrid chokes necessarily better? And I would say not really. If you can latch onto someone's neck and put submitting pressure on their neck, the exact way that you do it probably is a bit less relevant. The neck ultimately is a great handle. It doesn't have a lot of flexibility in terms of the way that it can bend. So if you get choking pressure on someone's neck, that should be sufficient. Now, when we talk about breaking and tearing limbs, it's a little bit different. You've got a lot more bend and flexibility and mobility in your arms and your legs. And so in those situations, blending mechanics can actually help you a lot. But I would say when it comes to attacking the neck, it doesn't really matter if it's a pure choke, if it's like a pure air choke, a pure blood choke. It doesn't matter if it's a hybrid. The most important thing is to make sure that it works. You can do it with control, you can do it safely, and it's legal under whatever rule set you're competing with. Now, one other thing to bear in mind, though, is that when you start talking about hybrid chokes, you can sometimes skirt the rules a little bit. For example, cranks are illegal under a lot of rule sets, but if you do a hybrid choke, you can be cranking people in a way that technically would be considered a legal choke. And although this is kind of a fact of life when we're training jiu-jitsu, I would suggest that if you are in the training room and you're training with your friends, as always, make sure that everything you do in jiu-jitsu is consent-based. If you are training with people who are not accustomed to having their neck cranked, or if they have pre-existing conditions, or they've otherwise told you they don't want to do neck cranks, don't do those, right? Don't be that guy. Always look for consent when you're doing anything. And if you are doing something that is outside of people's reasonable expectations, then you definitely want to get consent first, rather than just assume that they'll be okay with things, especially when attacking very high-risk areas like the neck. We don't want to do damage to those, especially if a person might not consent to whatever you're doing. So all of this is to say that there's a lot of different mechanics at place in terms of how you can choke someone, and they vary in their legality depending on the rule set. You can have blood chokes, air chokes, compression chokes, cranks. Here we're saying you can also have hybrid chokes. Not necessarily a good or bad thing, but again, just make sure that whatever you're doing is legal under the rule set and expected by your training partners. And additionally, if you know that a choke is supposed to rely on one mechanism, but you're finding that that's not how it's working for you, you might want to consider whether that's an issue with your technique. So there we go, a bunch of conversations about the different types of choking mechanics in jiu-jitsu. I will put links to all of the other mini episodes about the different types in the show notes, and I definitely recommend you listen to those. I'm going to keep on with these mini episodes, and I think the next series, we're going to talk about breaking mechanics, which is the types of submissions that attack your arms and your legs. That's going to be quite different from how we've discussed choking mechanics, so I'm really looking forward to that. In the meantime, if you want to listen to any of our episodes of BJJ Mental Models, either the mini episodes or the main feed, or if you want to sign up to our newsletter or join BJJ Mental Models Premium, everything we make lives at bjjmentalmodels.com. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.